Hi, I'm Liam Dann, New Zealand Herald Business Editor at Large, and welcome to this episode of Money Talks. This is a podcast about money, but we're not going to tell you how to get rich, and we're not going to try and pick the next interest rate move. In this series, I'll be talking to interesting New Zealanders about how money has shaped their lives and what they've learned over the years. For today's podcast, I'm joined by Fisher Fund's CEO and former Cabinet Minister, Simon Power. Kia ora, Simon. Welcome to Money Talks.
Thanks very much, Liam. Great to be here.
How long is it at Fisher Funds now?
About 6.5, 7 months, so middle of February I started there.
And how has that been? Quite a shift from TVNZ chief, but almost some familiarity there around sort of into the finance world?
Yeah, so at Westpac I looked after BT, managed funds for a period there, but also for a slightly longer period looked after the advisor network. And so that combined with a everlasting interest in regulation and policy settings has meant that it's been a terrific opportunity, too good to turn down.
Yeah, well, I'll come back to it because obviously as Commerce Minister you were deeply involved in reform of the financial market sector, and that's something perhaps to have a look back at. But I want to go right back here first and just ask you what your first money memories are, what your first memories of having money in your hand might be as a child.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a couple of things. The first was I do remember getting, a $5 or a $10 note and a Christmas card from a grandmother back in the
that was a big deal
way back.
Then.
Oh, it was huge. It was a huge deal. And so I do remember the kind of, the having the note in the hand, as it were. And then I have, reasonably vivid memories of my last couple of years at school of doing the night fill at Melody's New World in Palmerston North.
Yeah.
And that might have been kind of 2 or 3 nights a week. And so getting that $33 or $35 net or whatever it was a week in the hand, I definitely remember those first associations with money and earning.
Sure. And do you remember what you might have splashed out on in those days?
Yeah, well, I do remember a particularly vivid short-sleeved pink shirt with a vertical zip on it as an early investment. Books, though, mainly, which sounds slightly geeky, but that was true. And so I've always been a collector of books, and so I do remember that. But the odd hot chocolate record, things like that. But nothing.
The shirt sounds like it's very early 80s.
Well, that's right. No, that's exactly right. So that would have been working in the supermarket. Would have been 86, 87.
Oh yeah, Miami Vice era, all those
correct.
Pastels.
Absolutely right.
Absolutely
right.
Very good. I read an opinion piece you did for the Herald a few years back where you mentioned your father's advice on saving. I just wondered, if you could tell me a little bit about what your parents did and what they sort of instilled in you around money. Yeah,
look, so Dad was in cars and retail, and Mum was in retail, real estate, and then actually only recently has stepped back from doing, a couple of days a week in retail as well, now that she's in her kind of mid-70s. So very much people-associated professions. And I guess what was instilled in me was you work hard, which won't surprise any listeners to this podcast. I've seen that repeated in the odd time tuning in. But I do think that as well as that was the idea that you're never quite sure when things are going to get hard or harder. And so to make sure that a portion of that is swept into a savings account. And that's something that Lisa and I have tried to instill in our boys as well.
Sure, yeah. When you look back at that era, what do you recall about money and economics through that time? You're obviously old enough to recall the tail end of the Muldoon era and the big government, then coming of age through all those reforms. It's obviously a hugely influential time on New Zealand's economic history, but what did you sort of take from it?
That's a great question. So in 1984, when I was in fourth form, as it then was called, I can vividly remember a great teacher, Michael Melbourne, had the pictures of the fourth Labour government cabinet up on our wall in our fourth form homeroom, I guess it was called. And thinking about how they had come into office, a couple of things resonated. The first was just the breaking down of the construct of a different way of managing the economy, if I can put it that way. And then secondly, and this stayed with me, the power of the first term of a government.
Right.
So watching Roger Douglas, Richard Prebble, that band of Mike Moore. I mean, Geoffrey Palmer was an extraordinary legislator.
Yeah.
And so when when I thought back about the opportunities that first term presented them, that stuck with me for the next 25 years, really.
Wow. Yeah. And at school, I mean, how early did you get did you have an interest in politics?
Well, it sort of started, I had a most wonderful fifth form history teacher, Mrs. Robertson, who had us do a unit on US politics in the 60s. So Kennedy, Johnson,
lively
Nixon.
Stuff. Yeah.
And that has literally stuck with me. I mean, I'm still a student. I'm still enrolled at Victoria University and I'm still a student of US politics. I mean, as we sit here now,
what are you studying? Yeah.
I'm under the very patient tutelage of two supervisors who are letting me do a part-time PhD in US political leadership.
Wow.
And so I'm very lucky to be doing that,
so you
5 days a
weren't
week.
kidding that you will be watching the debate, which we've dragged you away from the Harris-Trump debate
I'll
later on.
certainly be watching it. No question about that. And so that's remained with me, actually, all the way through since school.
Sure, yeah. Were there other favourite subjects? I mean, and sports? I guess I saw on Wikipedia that you were a senior rep in 2 sports, but it didn't really say what sports.
No, I don't think that's right. I struggled along in the second 15 rugby team and struggled along in the second 11 cricket team. So senior might have been I was old, but I wasn't a performer at all.
Right.
In fact, quite the opposite. I was probably
enthusiastic team member.
Well, that's right. And I was probably more in the, when I look back on it, really, I was enjoyed, debate, drama, school musicals, in fact, and all that sort
on
of
the
thing.
stage.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit of that.
So going to university, you did law and political science.
That's
right. In court, there's this sort of a theatrical element to both aspects of politics. But did you end up wrestling between the political science side and the law side? I mean, was there a choice to be made?
That's a great question. So I went to practice law off the back of watching several episodes of LA Law in the late 80s, and back in those days, I'm not sure if it's the same now, you had to do some electives, for first year law, and I elected to do political science. And I remember sitting in the back row listening to Professor Margaret Clark, who talking to us about participating in politics, participating in public policy. And I can remember sitting in the back of that classroom, and it emptied out, and a stats class or something came in after us, and I was still sitting there thinking, actually, that's what I want to do.
Right, yeah.
And so law, in many respects, became the byproduct of wanting to study political science. And as it turns out, my memory is my grades were a lot better in political science than they were in law. Yeah. Some subjects in law I enjoyed so much I did them twice. So
I guess it's not quite LA Law though when you get out to your first firm in Palmerston North and.
No, but I tell you that I went to work for Fitzherbert Rowe, who to this day I regard as the most generous employer.
Right.
They allowed a 28, 29-year-old to put their hand up to go into national politics when I'd only been practicing law for 4 or 5 years, really, and they were extraordinarily generous, and I've never forgotten that.
Sure.
And I did some time as a duty solicitor, as well as doing, corporate and commercial law. Did some time at Kensington Swan up here, just a short burst, doing property work. They again were very generous in taking me on. But look, to be honest, it wasn't really. The way that you were controlling time wasn't a strength of mine. So probably never destined to be a great lawyer.
Right. Yeah. Was money ever a big factor in career choice at that point? I guess if you headed to politics, not really, Liam. And I mean, I was watching friends of mine go on to become partners in law firms and accounting firms and so on. And in my early 30s, I was sitting in opposition, watching, Helen Clark and Michael Cullen and Annette King at the height of their powers. And I wouldn't change that. Yeah.
I wouldn't change that. I think it was the most incredibly rewarding time. And I know this is a bit hackneyed to say, but it was just such a privilege to sit in one of those green chairs for a period of time. And no, I didn't do it for the money.
Can you tell us a little bit about the process of how you got involved and, in
politics?
In politics, yeah.
Look, I'd always had an interest, but then when Dennis Marshall stood down in Rangitikei, it must have been 1998, I guess, I'm guessing now. And in 1999, I ran to be the candidate, and I achieved that, and then I won the seat at, I guess it must have been 29 or 30, something like that. And we won it by 289 votes. And actually, the really slightly more interesting thing about that was that one of the ballot boxes went missing. And so my recollection is that the ACT Party sought a judicial review in Rangitikei, which had the potential to hold up Helen Clark's government coming into power in 1999. And actually, I'd forgotten largely about it until my valedictory speech, when my old friend from the other side, Trevor Mallard, yelled out across the house, "You can give the box back now." And, so there wasn't enough votes in the box to offset the 289. The court said, in you go. And that was interesting because I arrived as a politician with a student loan. And I must have been one of the first from that generation to turn up as a member of parliament with a student loan. And that was different. Listening to Steve Mahari and other tertiary education ministers talk about how student loans worked while you're kind of sitting there with one. It was quite an interesting dynamic.
Was it always national for you? I mean, I guess you've talked a little bit about some of the change that happened in the 80s and things, and I guess I'm maybe generalising, but I think you're seen as someone who straddles, is a fairly sort of centrist, kind of able to straddle the party divide a bit.
Yes, it was always national, I have this view on small government. I believe in the powers of fundamental market economies. I believe in those things very, very strongly. Look, I was what the National Party, I guess, would now term as one of their more liberal members. Good friend Catherine Rich and others of that time, Clem Simic, probably Morris Williamson, others would consider themselves similarly socially liberal. And actually the extraordinary thing was, Rangitikei, potentially quite a conservative electorate, although remember, very, very independent thinkers, very smart people. It's the home of MMP. Bruce Beetham was from Rangitikei, so very thoughtful, understand electoral systems, really clever constituents, and they sort of adopted me really as a sort of liberal lawyer representing that terrific part of the country.
And I mean, I guess you haven't trained in economics, but that sort of those economic values have been instilled in you, or you've seen them through just being out in the world.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a great question. I think that, intuitively, another way of thinking about it is to say that New Zealanders are far smarter than they're generally given credit for by policymakers, by those in decision-making roles. This idea that you can only get an idea across through a soundbite or through a simple message, this is just not correct.
Right.
New Zealanders are really smart. They understand the debate. They understand the nuance of debate. They understand complex reporting if they're interested in the subject matter. I mean, step back from it and ask yourself, when was the last time you could say the New Zealand public got an election wrong?
Right,
And actually they don't. They work out the system that they're operating under. They work out how to constrain and empower different parties, and they work out the shape of the government they'd like at any one time. They work out when they're tired of them. They work out when they're ready. They're actually really clever. And I think the more that we can upweight that conversation to reflect back that level of sophisticated thinking, the better.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess, talking about markets and capitalism working, it's obviously the argument works best when it's working well. And you inherited it, the system as coming in as a cabinet minister. 2008, you had inherited the GFC, and then subsequently the finance company collapses. I am curious to get your sort of views with a good bit of hindsight now on what sort of learned. I mean, certainly I would say the regulatory reform that you oversaw, the introduction of the FMA and the Financial Markets Conduct Act, is seen as something of a great success. It certainly was very much welcomed by the industry and seemed to deal with some of the issues that were there at the time. I mean, do you sort of look back with pride on that? And also, are we still fit for purpose now that you're sitting on the other side, I guess?
Yeah, we're very much fit for purpose. Just answering the second question first. I think that, the thing about regulation of markets is that it should be done generationally so that there is a surety and a consistency in the application of regulation and the way a regulator interacts with market participants, including, of course, mum and dad investors. And when I think back on it, the kind of last time that it had been overhauled was actually Sir Geoffrey Palmer when he did the Securities Act legislation. And I spent time with Sir Geoffrey, understanding the levers and the depth of knowledge you had to have to make some of these changes. Spent a lot of time with industry participants beforehand, testing, ideas, sharing information. And the participants in markets were really open with me. It was a high trust model.
Yeah,
Nothing ever leaked during those discussions that I'm aware of or that I can recall. And so to that end, working alongside not only cabinet colleagues like Sir Bill English and others who were very determined to progress with work, credit has to go to Liam Dann, who was sitting on the other side of the House and had started the Capital Markets Development Task Force when she was Minister.
Yeah.
I'd supported that work from opposition. And then when we moved to make some changes in government, she was very supportive of those moves. So a lot of them ended up being, and this is going very much from memory, it's a long time ago now, but they ended up being quite bipartisan in nature, which gave markets, I think, reassurance that it wasn't going to flip on its lid if there was a change of government. And I look, it's for others to judge whether it's been successful or not. I just hope it's brought some stability.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're going through a fairly sort of solid downturn right now. There's been the odd construction company go over, but we haven't seen, there just isn't that tier of, public touch wood at this stage. But I mean, I guess, it does feel like the financial sector has been more robust going through this this current sort of downturn. Admittedly, it's a more heavily signalled downturn than what we got with the GFC.
Yes. But, look, I think that's fair. I recall one of the big debates being whether participants or those with market expertise should be on the governance side of the FMA. And I think in the end, that's the right decision, to have people with knowledge, to have people where, if there are conflicts, they can be managed, but people who have a deeper understanding of, as you say, the toing and froing of market dynamics. And I think that's proven to be helpful.
Yeah, sure. I mean, with the fund manager hat on now, I mean, are there any things you'd like to see tweaked or changed to try and sort of supercharge markets a bit?
Yeah, look, I think where we're sitting at the moment, we do need to have a nationwide discussion about whether the settings are right on KiwiSaver. So, we're having, broad discussions about whether 3 or 4% seems to be the right contribution rate. In Australia, they're debating, I think it's between 11.5 and 12. Now, listen, we're very early in the life cycle of KiwiSaver. In the sense that, we haven't had anybody go from 18 to 65 yet. I do think, though, that when it was first introduced, now we've got maybe $110, $111 billion worth sitting in KiwiSaver. And the idea of that in the super fund, which I think is at about 77, is that they would help smooth the cost of universal superannuation. Now those numbers would indicate to me more of a tripartite discussion between those three components is a better way to think about it, rather than just having this notion of two entities or two schemes smoothing the cost. There becomes, I think, an opportunity to have a conversation about how much is enough, how much is the right amount. There's always a risk that when you say 3 plus 3 or 3 plus 4 are the right signals, that the New Zealand taxpayer or worker or contributor or client is sitting there saying, "Oh, well, if the government says those settings are enough, they must be enough." Actually,
people don't go further.
That's right. So having a bit more of a,
or they don't go further until they're sort of 58, 60 or something like that, and they suddenly see a retirement.
We shouldn't be nervous about having a conversation about whether the settings are up for debate or not. And I know that policymakers will be sitting there saying this isn't the right time to be having that discussion, cost of living crisis, etc.
Yeah.
But actually, you know what? It's exactly the right time.
Yeah.
Because if you signal these things ahead of time, OCR's down, there's some opportunity potentially with some disposable income. People will be starting to think about how they use that disposable income now.
We may actually have a few months or a year of something normal.
That's right. So that's actually the ideal opportunity to set out a bit of a pathway, have an intelligent conversation and see where it ends up.
Yeah. Would you go as far as like advocating compulsory super like Australia?
Look, I think the way I'd answer that, and I'm not trying to be evasive, but the way I'd answer that is to say always interested in a conversation.
Yeah.
I think contribution rates are probably just as important a conversation as compulsion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other tricky one, because Tamsin, my boss, asked me to. She said you should ask him, should the super age be raised at some point?
I think, I think that MMP creates an environment where there's going to be ongoing discussions about the right age here.
Yeah.
These things will settle for the moment. You're better off talking about what a pathway might look like, both on contribution, age, and other things, if that's the sensible conversation to have for a government of the day. Having said that, I'm not going to stick my beak into what may or may not have come out of negotiations.
Yeah. Fair enough. You don't have to give us a headline on that one. So when we look at your career path, I mean, obviously, into some very senior roles at Westpac, and then now with a fund manager, it's been very much and Minister of Commerce. But was it a sort of a detour to be CEO of TVNZ?
No, well, I guess if you put it like that. But the way I would think about it is, I was at Westpac, had a wonderful, set of opportunities, terrifically enjoyed my time there. I applied to be the CEO. I didn't get the job. Catherine's doing a great job in that role. And so I was sort of thinking about, what might be next.
I mean, would you have had to maybe go to Australia and do time in Australia to...
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know
who knows?
the answer
But
to
I
that.
mean, you're obviously quite committed to New Zealand.
Very. And I think that, hopefully that's clear. And that's one of the great things about Fisher Funds is, you got this 2/3 ownership from the Toy Foundation based out of the Taranaki Community Trust, the old Taranaki Community Trust. Big chunk of what we do goes into that community every year. I'm from the provinces. I don't identify myself as an Aucklander as such, even though Auckland has been very good to me. But I'm from the Manawatu, and I'm delighted to see those communities do well out of an organisation like ours. But TVNZ, the opportunity came up. And I thought that could be a really interesting thing to do given the potential merger with Radio New Zealand. Finding I had a set of skills, I think, that was helpful, some commercial background, but also understand how public policy is built. I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
I mean, it was a tough time.
It was a tough time.
But always a tough time in the media.
Tell me at the start of any government or at the start of any role where you don't have challenges. And that I just think that's the nature of going into these roles. But I mean, look, I don't think it's any great secret in the industry. I had a bit of a soft spot for the newsroom. I loved the work they did. I spent time down there when I could, keeping my hands off editorial decisions, of course, and really enjoyed understanding it. I'd been in front of plenty of those journalists during my career, and watching them prepare was very different from being on the, on the receiving end. The merger didn't go ahead. And that was really what I was there for. So we put in place the strategy to upweight the digitisation and so on. And then it just seemed, as I think I described to one of your colleagues, the natural inflection point to say, well, let's see what else is there.
Different pathway there. But interestingly, I see RNZ is looking at moving into the building now.
I'd read that somewhere,
So look, it seems like whether it's formal or not, they may end up, the nature of media, end up working closely together. But.
Well, I think, you know this better than anyone, but the industry has an enormous capacity to adapt.
It's always adapting. Absolutely. I want to get into some of our quick fire questions now, if I can. Just going back a bit, I assume. What's the poorest you'd say you've ever been?
Well, look, I was an undergraduate student for 6 years at Victoria in Wellington. That was of my own doing. It should have been 5, but it was 6. And by the time you hit your 6th year with a student loan, you're
was that
starting
too much partying?
Well, I mean, it's fair to say that I enjoyed a couple of law papers so much I did them twice, and I genuinely enjoyed them. But
Grant Robertson still beat you for the length of time at uni, probably.
Grant may well have, but I'm not big on canned spaghetti now. Put it that way.
Yeah.
It's not something I would choose to eat if I had a choice.
Yeah. How about sort of the other side? I guess maybe when you've got your first paycheck as a lawyer or something. But do you remember splashing out and thinking, "Gosh, I've got a little bit of money"? And if so, what's the sort of most indulgent purchase you can remember making?
I don't remember splashing out, but the most indulgent purchase actually was after I left TVNZ. Lisa and I took the kids to Washington and to New York, and then I stayed and spent some time researching in presidential libraries in Jimmy Carter in Atlanta, Georgia, LBJ in Austin, Texas, and then Reagan as part of the study I'm doing. And there was a point where I was sitting in one of those archive rooms going through materials thinking, actually, this is very self-indulgent, but I loved it. So that was probably the most indulgent thing I've done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I don't play, I'm not very good at golf. I don't own a boat. Yeah. So kind of US politics is my thing.
You got a big month and a half coming up.
Yeah, I have.
One we've been asking is Christopher Luxon on the campaign trail sort of got caught out. He was asked about how much he spent on groceries, and he said $60 because I think he was talking about stocking up the apartment in Wellington. But how much do you spend on groceries? Is it a big shop for you?
Yeah, we've got one boy down at Canterbury University now.
Right,
He's a pretty intense rugby player, and another one who's 6'4" and a pretty intense basketball player and bass player. So no, I would say it'd be in the hundreds. So it'd be probably I'd be guessing, but I would say $400 or $500 a week at least. I would
with teenage boys, it's sometimes hard to get through one. You have to go back again.
Well, it's osmosis, isn't it? They just stand in front of the fridge
and when the mates come over.
Yeah, well, there's that as well.
Do you buy lotto tickets? And if so, what sort of amount do you imagine winning?
Do buy the odd one. Don't really imagine winning at any time. And I think I'm always struck by when the media interview winners, how much they want to give away. Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting phenomena in New Zealand. But so no, I don't think a whole lot about it.
Yeah, I just asked because some people, myself, I wouldn't like the idea of winning 40 million or something because it's going to turn my life upside down. So I just imagine winning, 1.2 million or something.
Okay,
which I don't buy the tickets, so there's
well, there you go.
Very little chance of me winning. on a sort of slightly wider scale, and we've touched on it a little bit, but how much is making money important to you, and how much is that sort of a byproduct of success for you?
I don't kind of run at a role because of what it pays. I run at it because it's going to be interesting, it's going to be challenging. I know it sounds trite, but the NZ Inc. component's a big deal for me. And so that weighs on a decision that I might make about a role. I would say that, anybody that's ever asked me what they should study at university, I've always just said, do what you enjoy. Yeah. And it'll lead to where it leads to. Some people think of university as a ticket to a profession. My view has always been, and I'm a perpetual student, so my view has always been actually just do what you love and it'll work itself out. Yeah, and that's really important. I mean, I can recall at Westpac, doing 1 year, doing the final interviews for the graduate program, and two of the most stunning graduates we had, one was a musician and one was had a master's in psychology. Plenty of great commerce graduates, but it was just fascinating having people with a different perspective. So I would say if you love it, study it, and what's more, keep studying it. Yeah.
One last question. We always ask, if you were Prime Minister for a day, if we could magically make you Prime Minister for a day, and I can't remember.
You always ask this?
Were you? No. Just thinking about back in the days of being a Cabinet Minister, did you ever have to fill in?
No, I don't recall ever being the acting Prime Minister.
No, but you must have been close. Depends how many people were out of the country.
I think Jerry did it a few times.
Yeah. So I guess there's what you might have thought then and what you might think now. But what if we could magic that power and actually also give the Prime Minister power to do some of this stuff? What would be the policy that you would most like to sort of implement if you had, that kind of power that you think could address some of the big challenges for New Zealand, the social inequality, and generally, create a bit more wealth in the country?
Education every day of the week. When I look at the statistics and health, justice, welfare, education is the key to opportunity. And giving, those that you were describing earlier who might not have had careers where money was as much of an opportunity, education will break that cycle every time. And so, if I had the wand, I would be going hard on the quality and on the opportunity, both in the compulsory sector and in the tertiary sector as well. I think that for an economy of our size that is, utterly dependent on the rest of the world to a very, very large extent, just having the smartest, most well-educated, most focused workforce, and just adding to that global horsepower that a country of this size has got the potential to do, I wouldn't do anything above that on a list. I just think it's the number one thing.
Sure. Look, that's great, Simon. I'm going to leave it there. Simon Power, thanks for being on Money Talks.
Thanks, Liam.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Money Talks. If you want to get in touch, drop me a line at liam.dan@nzme.co.nz. And you can read more from me at nzherald.co.nz. Thanks to my producer, Ethan Sills, and sound engineer, Leanne McDonald. Follow Money Talks on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, with new episodes available every Thursday.